And we are live. Welcome to the Raw Food Health Empowerment Podcast, where we delve into the powerful benefits of a holistic, high raw vegan lifestyle for achieving optimal health, brain function, and overall well being. I'm your host, Samantha Salmon, certified brain optimization coach. And today I'm so excited to have this conversation with the amazing Clare Mann. We have a special guest she's a vegan psychologist, communication skills trainer, and accomplished author. She's written 2 books. And I think it's 2 books, probably more books, but 2 that I know of. The second one is huge. Everyone should get it and read it. And we're going to talk a lot about it today. But Clare brings over 16 years of vegan experience to our conversation, having transitioned from 3 decades of vegetarianism to fully embrace a vegan lifestyle. She's the brilliant mind behind several books, including Vystopia, The Anguish of Being Vegan in a Non-Vegan World, and Myths of Choice, Why People Won't Change and What You Can Do About It. As an organizational psychologist, university lecturer, and speaker, Clare now dedicates her expertise to empowering vegans worldwide. She coined the term Vystopia to describe the unique emotional challenges faced by vegans living in a predominantly non-vegan world. And it is quite an experience, right? So we're going to dive deep into the psychology of that, and hopefully you'll leave with some skills and some tools on dealing with the emotional aspects of this lifestyle. We're going to talk about how it's affecting individuals as well as families. I know in the last few trainings I've done, people have mentioned how much this is affecting the children. And that's a huge one that we want to address. So thank you so much, Clare Mann, for coming on to the show. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Ever since we made a connection, it's been wonderful for firstly what you're doing, and thank you for that. The benefits of, as we know, a whole food, plant source diet, particularly raw, is people become so vibrant, so alive. And yet you're so right. One of the biggest challenges vegans face is not what to eat, because hands down, you'll know more than most people on this call, is the science behind that. It really is settled on this occasion. But it is about the family, isn't it? And it's about relationships. So I'm so glad we're starting to address this so we can empower ourselves.
Yes. And we want to scale this message up. So for those of you watching and listening live, thank you again for joining us live. Please share this broadcast right now with everyone you know, because I know that they're all having this issue, okay? Regardless of what it is. We're going to specifically look at this through the lens of eating a clean, high raw vegan lifestyle, navigating, being consistent with that, and managing it in various scenarios, right? You're at the family dinner, and folks, you're dealing with ridicule from the family, or your child is in an environment with other peers who don't necessarily eat that way. So we're going to handle all of that. But I really want to highlight this book, Myths of Choice. Clare, if you have the book, if you want to just lift it up for people, there are a couple of quotes in there that I find are just like mic drop moments, right? There's just 2 I'm gonna highlight right now, but there's a ton. Like every page, you could literally just highlight. But there's one line where you say, "We do not see reality as it is. We see reality as we are."
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, yes. Like this is like, because we're all in our own world, And I talk about in my trainings too, like how, you could have 5 people look at an event, like my personal story of, my grandma dying at home on hospice care due to type 2 diabetes, right? The family was there. All these people were there. They watched, they witnessed, they heard. And yet we left that situation with a different course of action,
Yes.
Like it all meant something different. Some people got tattoos, other people changed their diets, And it was really a really fascinating situation. Like, and it had me wondering, why do people do what they do? I expect them to act a certain way, but they're not acting this way. Why is that? And this one line really speaks to that. And then you have another line where you say, in order to choose the life you want to live, you must relinquish the notion that you can control others.
Yes, so true. Hey, and you,
Seriously.
yes, that's right. Exactly. Well, I think we live in a time, don't we, when everyone is jumping up and down trying to influence other people. And as vegans, we can be very responsible for that, largely because we have all this information. We see people with broken bodies and they're sick and they're unwell. And we see behind closed doors, hidden in plain sight on our dinner tables, the suffering that goes into, what is happening to animals. And then, of course, destruction of the earth on which we live. Everything is there. So we want to push, we want to control, and we can't do that. And
Yeah.
if once we step into our power and realize that what people think of us really is none of our business in one sense, but we have to be responsible for the effect we have on others. But
Mm-hmm.
you're right, if we're going to choose the life we want to live and get real clear about what our time on this planet is about, and we step forward boldly with integrity, other people are going to push back, but we can't control them. What we can do is lay out the feast in front of people without shaming or blaming or trying to push, and also be an example. Look at you, you're a vibrant, healthy individual, interesting, bright, intelligent, who just happens to be vegan or raw vegan.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest example, because there's so much sickness and unwellness and trauma coming out of the last few years. We've got to be in a world you can be anything. Let's be kind.
I love that. So when we in terms of exploring the emotional aspect, right? What are some of the emotional challenges that children might face in particular, as their parents are, because we have first of all, let me just preface this by saying we have an obesity crisis in this country, and it's not just this country, America. I know you're in Australia, but globally, we have an obesity crisis because America has exported its sickness and
Yeah.
in the name of fast food, of processed food, right?
Yeah.
And we're seeing signs of atherosclerosis, that's plaque in the arteries, as young as 8 years old.
Yeah.
So, and all of this compromises brain function. You have young children with developing brains. They're not fully developed until their mid 20s. This plaque in the arteries is affecting development, right? It's affecting their cognitive abilities and their, ability to function. We have high rates of ADD, autism diagnosis, right? All of this stuff going on. So it makes sense for parents to really step up into healthy leadership, to encourage healthy, clean eating for their children, but their children are mixing with other children who don't necessarily eat this way. So how can we, what kind of advice do you have for the parents and for the kids for this type of
Sure,
situation?
absolutely. I'd like to build on what you've just said there. Let's reinforce. You said as young as 8 years old. I remember several years ago, I had the great delight to share the stage with the former president of the American Cardiologist Association, Professor Kim Williams, Dr. Kim
Yeah.
Williams. Really worth checking out. And he said something very interesting. He said there are two types of cardiologists. They're either vegan or haven't read the research. Okay. But what I remember there is another colleague of mine, a vegan pediatrician, showed an image of an unborn child, an ultra scan, and there were shards of buildup of fat in the liver that should not have been there in an unborn child, where the mother was being told to drink milk, the reproductive secretion of a bovine, and high sort of fat and protein diet was causing these issues. So we know the facts, we know the information. If we were to share that generally with other people, say at a school situation, empowering our children, it would just be, oh, well, I don't believe that, or I don't resist that, because there are social and cultural myths that put these things in place. Unquestioned assumptions. We've always done it. We were given milk and cookies or whatever growing up. How can we empower our children? I think when, we want our children to eat clean, we want them to eat what nature intended, what our digestive systems are for. So obviously, if we just give them a salad every day and they're going in where people are having hot dogs, how can we, for instance, mirror that in some sort of way? I remember talking to some vegan childcare establishments actually in the UK, and they've done some great podcasts. They were saying that they matched the diet as they transitioned to providing only vegan food. They weren't raw, but they used to do lasagnas and burgers and things like that, but they were whole food based burgers with, so they actually mirrored, because so much of it, as you say, is children want to belong. They don't want to be laughed at and ridiculed for having a cucumber sandwich. So let's, in that transition, make it easier for them, is that they're having all the normal fun sort of things of life, and it just happens to be vegan.
So there is some intentional effort for the parents in order to kind of match, which I would assume, I'm not a parent, right? So I'm just kind of asking on their behalf. But, it just has me thinking of like that extra burden that parents go through. First of all, they have to meal prep and plan for themselves, and meal prep and plan for their child. And now this other level of intentionality to make it match the other kids,
Sure. But
so
let's get it for a moment. We're not the only ones in the world that do something different. You could have a child that had a particular religious belief, and they go with those values to school. Okay,
right.
so what would we say to them? We wouldn't say, hey, hide it, try to pretend you're something else. The more the child can be empowered. Most of us bring our habits, good and bad, into the world through what happened in our childhood, our immediate parenting, our younger schooling, the adults that were around us, and we often revert back to that sort of thing as we internalize our sense of self within ourselves, and before we kind of know ourselves. So the more we can celebrate what we're doing in families and make our children proud of, explain to them, why is it, Mum, that we eat a little bit differently, and we can't go and have burgers at McDonald's, apart from the fact that no one should be having a burger at McDonald's for their own health, well-being, and what the horror of what's going on behind the scenes, is explain to the child, hey, no, we can have burgers. It's no problem. Most children, relate very much to the animal issue, of course, is actually and it has to be age appropriate what we're telling children. A 5-year-old isn't going to go in there and have to explain the ethics of not taking away the lives of others, but they might say, well, we've got a dog at home and I wouldn't eat my dog, so why would I eat a piggy? For instance, like that. But in the more we can empower children to realize vegans are not the only people who bring their values to the dinner table. And so we do too much of the heavy lifting sometimes, just because. And often people say it's 98% of the world that is non-vegan. I don't believe that. It is much less than that. It's just a lot of people don't put their hand up wearing the T-shirts. And I really find it. So is empowering children to say, say a child, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, I'll tell you why we're vegan in my family. You tell me why we're not. Make it sort of so it's not such a big, the child is with their back against the wall, having to defend a position, and using words like, just being kind, or it gives us more energy. My dad likes gardening, age appropriate again. Let's not put the burden on the children to have to defend a value that actually most people are born with. They've chosen to forget the solution to our problems.
And I love that. I like the idea of educating children, because they're not, like, their brains are developing and they're learning, right? So I feel like it's a learning opportunity. The whole child rearing process, the children are observing and learning, and they're naturally going to ask questions about a variety of things, not just foods, but it's a really great opportunity. Unfortunately, the school system doesn't do it, but they could and should, I mean, you could mold it into science, you could mold it into math, it feels like a huge opportunity. But even like what you were saying earlier too, it just points to resources. And I know there are folks like Matt with Raw Intuition. I've had him on the podcast before. He has a children's book. Karen Ramsey, I know, has a children's book for kids with autism. And so there are books available for folks to get into, like, for raw foods and for cooked, clean vegan foods, how to make things like child appropriate, I guess for the younger kids, like the 5-year-olds and stuff like that. So thank you for that. When it comes,
Sorry, I was going to say one of our biggest problems, of course, is not the children. It's actually the teachers. I'm actually seeing teachers that will, through their own resistance to this, actually ridicule the child And I'm hearing from other parents when they take their children into schools and the mother explains specifically that their diet is different, they find out later that the child has been served those almost in a passive aggressive way, I would say. And I
Wow.
think this happens a lot with veganism. I've been a psychologist now over 30 years, and I can honestly say in all my training, I have never seen such inappropriate breaking of brown boundaries. And I think it's happening in schools too, where people may go and see a psychologist and say they're a vegan. And I have a whole book full of, I think I'm going to write another book on it, where the psychologist or counselor or social worker will resist and say, don't make me feel guilty about what I eat. Can you imagine that if somebody went in as a born again Christian and someone explained it and they said, don't make me feel guilty, I'm going to hell? I have never seen such boundary breaking. I think it's a good thing, and I want to empower people on this call to realize when the resistance is strong, people know there's something that they need to look at. It's when people are indifferent and don't care. So the more the resistance is because the person's having to make a change from within of habits, often unquestioned assumptions, things they've not even considered in their lives. But I'm actually seeing this in teachers as well. So we have a role to play. And I'm sorry if I cut you off a little early. I wanted to attach it to what we said.
No, I
Is
love this.
how we communicate with the teachers. As parents, let's take back some control here. Is people have relinquished, parents often have relinquished their power to the teacher. And now we're seeing all sorts of practices going in schools that we don't really want our children to be involved with necessarily.
Right.
Very age inappropriate discussions that really don't need to be had or put onto the shoulders of children. So let's take back that power.
You know, honestly, like even as you mentioned that, like first of all, Claire, every time we talk, I feel like we could talk for days nonstop. Like you bring up such great points because as you're talking and you're bringing up all these other things, it's just reminding me that all of the issues we have within the community is not about the food. It's never been about the food. Like to change your diet is really so easy, but it's that human aspect, our communication skills, our issues around people pleasing and, first of all, an element of social engineering, and also peer pressure, because I find even with adults, it's like, it's high school all over again. Like just this people just under the influence of other people, regardless of what credentials they have to even be in that authority level position, But this thing, what you mentioned, has me thinking like, if I were to have a child, and of course, all the parents would be like, whatever, because you don't have a child. But if I did, there's such a huge case right now for homeschooling because there's just so much, other than the nutrition piece, the education piece, which is what you're talking about. We all have different opinions of what makes sense for our child to learn, and it would make sense that it would be different based on the child, So yeah, I love that. And I think that's worth like exploring with this. Like why is the yardstick fitting in? Why can't we do something different that's optimized? Because really that's what we're doing with diet. We're optimizing the diet. We should be optimizing schooling for our young people,
Absolutely. That's right. There's far too much common sense there, Sam. It's far too much common sense. I always think science catches up with common sense. You're absolutely right. Children are often told off in certain schools for asking too many questions. It was Albert Einstein who said, I had a wonderful education, but it was temporarily interrupted by when I had to go to school. Because, it's almost as if at school, every child is given a piece of cloth from which they have to create a uniform. And some children are big or tall and long, and other children are small. And but they have to have the same cloth. So both of them either have got this great big cloak on top of them, or their clothing is too tight. And rather than, I think there's a huge argument, and I would encourage it, of homeschooling, but collaborating with other parents. Because the reality is people have, whether one job, both parents have a job, or they may have multiple ones in some cases. So to take on the burden of education is another one. However, let's reconnect with other parents and actually work together to actually, take in turns almost. But because what's happening, I think, in school systems is they have been set up to deliberately, prepare people for the economic system, for jobs. as opposed to
Yeah.
being creative. What is my gift to the world? What are the problems around me? Um, and yet they're really created and engineered into adapting and fitting in. For the next 40 years, they can go to work, often with work they don't really want to do,
Mm-hmm.
to save up, to pay for a mortgage or rent or whatever, to get some freedom. Maybe we've got that back to front. And I think a time in our history is we have the influence over young people to get them to ask more questions is, why do we keep throwing the same, if the program is broken, why do we keep trying to mend this? And maybe we need to put it aside. And I do think the path is to look after our first environment, which is ourselves, and what we're giving
Mm-hmm.
children to eat in the main diets in Australia and across Europe and certainly in America is actually killing children. It's making them sick and unwell. So we have a role here to play as to if people look at healthy, vibrant children who are also not sick. So many of our problems, of course, is because our bodies are trying to get rid of toxins. There's no bad news with veganism, is there, and a plant source diet?
Right. And then you have too, like in the public school system, kids that are aggressive and not able to learn,
Yeah.
and they go home, and even for the parents that are involved, they're disciplining them in a very like physically harmful way, right? And not
Yeah.
realizing on top of that, they're feeding them refined sugar and chemicals and all this processed foods that is contributing to the problem. So you're creating trauma, right, on this child that then grows up to have a dysfunctional. First of all, the brain has already been affected by all these chemicals and toxins,
Yeah.
and now they're living really dysfunctional, which is that's the situation we're in right now. And I think the root of the problem is basically what you hit on, is this social engineering towards going along to get along. That is the root cause of this whole issue for many of the societal ills, instead of like actually thinking about what is the wisest the wisest plan of action, you know?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's absolutely. I remember I had parents that were very philosophical. So we asked the questions, if something happens around us. So, for instance, we look around, the vast majority of people, I don't have the figures off the top of my head, are on pharmaceutical medication because they're sick. And I remember as a child, I used to look around and think, well, if everybody's sick, what are the contributors to why that must happen? Well, one thing is people eat 3 times a day. What are they eating? Are they active? Are they doing the work they want? Do they have purpose? These were the sort of conversations we sort of had at home. My parents weren't vegan. I believe they would be now if they were alive, without a doubt. But they were kind and they cared. But that was the spirit of our time. But children didn't overeat. They were in the garden. They took food out of the garden as well. But asking those questions. So if we look around, it's not as if everyone's. It's interesting, Sam, where you get a child who's suddenly unwell, and the paper picks it up and says, but the parents were vegan, as if all the other children are thrivingly well and healthy. But the
Right.
question, I guess, you're trying to address for the audience, how do we communicate that? How do we, it's often adults, isn't it? They're going home to their home environments, and there's ridicule, there's undermining, there's, anger often. And this is an aspect of Vystopia. And for those who don't know the definition, let's quickly define it. Vystopia is the name I gave to a psychological anguish, where someone feels the deep trauma of knowing about the suffering of the institutionalized and systematized abuse of animals. But the next bit's interesting here is, but when they tell people is, do you know that your diet's killing you? Do you know this is what's happening to animals? Instead of people immediately going, oh my goodness, I didn't know, tell me more, they resist, they push back. And the definition says it's almost like a trance-like collusion with a dark and dystopian world people are not even aware they're in. But the third stage, again, comes back to this conformity. The vegan says, well, just a minute, if I didn't know about, and it is numbers like this, 1.3 trillion animals per year being abused by us, if we count every crustacean, every fish, which I think we should, they're sentient beings with lives, we say, well, I didn't know about that, or I didn't know that this diet is killing us, and all the evidence is there. What else don't I know? But then we're called a conspiracy theorist. Now, isn't that a term we know? So there's the definition of this. So when we go back into our families and we ask for a vegan meal, or we don't want to sit down to Thanksgiving, or Easter eggs because we know what happens in the dairy industry and to our health is at all these levels, we're laughed at, undermined. Now, I don't think we're afraid of conflict in those conversations per se, or what other people think. It's our feelings in relation to what other people are saying. When we empower ourselves and hold on to our values, we don't have to take excuses there and try to defend why we're vegan or why we don't still do this, as if we're imploring people to change and try to control them. When we stand in our power and go, hey, look, I've come across information that the diet we are eating is making us sick. Okay, even if it's a plant-based diet, it's not bringing out the vibrancy in us. So I'm actually following a path that is raw vegan, for instance. And if they laugh at you and do whatever, go, it's interesting you do this. These are your values and they're mine. We're both adults here. What's going on? Tell me why you eat the diet you have. Tell me about, the effects of your diet on your health. Don't do all the heavy lifting. Get the other person also to defend the values they're bringing to the dinner table. Because hands down, if facts alone would change people, the whole world would have to be vegan. They would have no excuse against it. Economically, everything. And so we're not up against that. We're up against myths of choice, the unquestioned assumptions, the social and cultural underpinnings. And we can find out, how do we know they exist? It's when people use 3 words: I should, I ought, I must. You must come home. You ought to go back to your family and have Thanksgiving. It's what we do. You really ought to give your children meat. You're actually starving them of protein. A should, a ought, or a must says there's an unquestioned assumption. But let's look around us. Tradition's an interesting one. We're taking the advice of people that aren't even alive. Surely we need to, start to actually take ownership of our, we've been taught these things through the well-meaning intent of our parents normally, because they've carried it from other people. This question, does that work for me? Did they have the full information? Maybe I need to ask more questions. Question.
Yeah. I like that. Because I had recently a raw vegan Thanksgiving, a raw vegan Christmas, family get together. I hosted and it made sense. And I hear other people saying, well, I host, but I make sure I have something that other people can eat. And this whole concept of can eat, it's like, who cannot eat fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds,
Yes.
That's a really, really sick person. And at that point, I would have them on green juice, so still
That's
healthy
right.
foods. I wouldn't be feeding someone who I consider a loved one saturated fat, cholesterol, chemicals and endocrine disruptors, right? Because I apparently love them, right? That's why they're in my home in a holiday situation. So it's like, it feels to me a lot of times when I hear it like a cognitive dissonance. It's like you're inviting people into your home, even if they're your mom, your dad, your grandma, your sister, whoever. And you eat a certain way, but yet you're going to compromise your own values because they're coming to your house. Like,
Yes.
make it make sense,
But it's interesting what you're saying there, because I've known people that have stormed out of Thanksgiving, have stormed out of Christmas because they didn't have an animal-based option, as if they're going to die through one meal. So is it really about the meal? No, of course it's not. People eat vegan food all the time. They eat avocados, bananas, apples, potatoes, carrots, crisps. They're not plant sourced, but they've got a lot of chemicals in, but they come from a potato, for goodness sake. And so it isn't about that. So when we always remember, when the reaction is out of proportion to the threat, it's pressed a button for something else. There's the psychology of it, really. So someone runs out of the room and says it's not fair. They're not really talking about the diet. It's pressed a button somewhere else. So if you're inviting, as you rightly say, someone to your home, it's for fellowship, it's for connection, it's coming together. And if the person says, well, I'm not coming, you yourself as the listener here feel that you should create something else, would you do that if you were an Islamic family and you invited the person next door? Would you suddenly have a pork chop over there just in case they wanted it? Of course you wouldn't, and they wouldn't expect it either. So let's stand in our power. And if there's that resistance, and don't ask people why are you reacting so much? ask what. Because when we ask what is the reason you're reacting so strongly, we get information. When we ask why, we get reason and justification. Okay, something so simple. Why didn't you come to my party last weekend, Sam? If you had, you could have made the effort, but you were a little bit tired after work and you made a bit of an excuse. I had a sore throat because you value our relationship and you weren't quite ready to, whatever. And you might, and I say to you, why didn't you come? You go, oh gosh, I was so well, I should have called you. Whereas if I say, hey, Sam, we really missed you on Saturday. What happened? You go, oh, Claire, I felt so awful. I should have rung you. Hands up. I was very tired, but I've been thinking about it all week. I'm so glad you've asked. I'm so sorry I didn't make it and I should have called. But whereas if we ask why, we tend to defend ourselves. Something is simple. So when people react so strongly, we go, what's going on here? What is it about what I'm eating or serving that's causing such a problem? But again, it comes from within. When we change our mindset, our thoughts, we stand in our power, we just try to make a lovely meal for people. We don't have to say, well, just in case they don't like, what they're eating just in smaller proportions every day or week, I have to make an excuse. It's lay the feast out in front of people. And if they don't go, I'd be very disappointed if you left. However, I do not want to serve the flesh and reproductive secretions of animals in my house. And I won't because, both you and I know mom or dad or whatever, there's no good news here. But what I do have prepared, I'd love you to try it and enjoy it. What you eat when you go home is fine. But let's stand in our power and stop making excuses for following a path that has no bad news.
Yeah, I love that. And you just highlighted something that's applicable to everyone, like folks getting triggered, because I've been that person on the other side, right? Yes. I remember being in a verbal brawl basically with my brother because he wasn't eating clean, my version of clean. He's eating fried chicken and all this kinds of stuff, and he has health issues, and I'm like, dude, what's going on, But of course, now I could smile about it because I'm aware that me yelling at him, which doesn't help him make change, it only makes him more resistant to change, right? To just be in defiance of me. But me yelling really came from my trauma place, from watching the death of my grandma due to a food situation, right? That could have been avoided, could have been reversed, And here I have a loved one basically asking me to watch him kill himself with the foods that he's choosing. I got triggered. So now which is really the answer to that is we all need to do our own emotional work, right?
Yes.
We do. Yes, to be able to have these questions, because the what questions come out of curiosity, and that curiosity opens the door for harmonious conversation, to just be a little bit more empathic on both sides, and maybe there's an opportunity to meet somewhere in the middle. You're not necessarily going to convert someone overnight. But that's why I just love everything you have in the book, and the quote that I mentioned above about relinquishing the notion that you can control others. I mean, life is so much less stressful when you live like that.
Yes, we've forgotten the solution to our problems in many ways. There's so many books out there and YouTube videos on how to communicate. And if there's no shortage of information, and yet why aren't people? It's because the inner work isn't done. And Sam, this is what I talk about, and this is why, and we can move into it just briefly now, for that whole definition I gave you of Vystopia, the struggle we have both internally, but also with our families. And that's why I'm running that free 3-day Vystopia recovery masterclass coming up in a couple of weeks. And people are very welcome. I know you've put the link there. We can mention it later. But, that will give tools and techniques to get people to really get back into their power, enter the path of doing the work on the inside so we can have those difficult conversations with ease.
Yes, I highly recommend it. The 3-day masterclass starts on the 15th here in America, right? Because you're in the future.
Yes.
So it's on the 15th here, and the link to register is in the description to this, wherever you're watching. If you're listening on the podcasting platform, it's in the show notes. There's also a link to Clare's Facebook community, the Vystopia Recovery and Transformation community, and also her LinkedIn. So you have all the ways to connect with Clare. Is there any other way that you would like folks to connect with you to kind of dive deeper into this topic?
Well, really, it's veganpsychologist.com is the main sort of website page I have. I will just say something about the masterclass, because people say a 3-day masterclass, is that what, 72 hours? And no, it's not. It's actually 1 hour per day over 3 days, when we will dive deep into how do we set in play the recovery of what we need to go through to empower ourselves, to decide, to improve the quality of the conversations with our families, but also how we want to be at work, at play, or on the world stage. But it starts with that inner journey. Like most things, vegan or non-vegan, it's the work's done on the inside. It's an inside job, as I say.
Absolutely. And is there anything else that should be mentioned that we didn't get to touch on that you feel is like really vital?
No, well, I think number one is be true to yourself. The more empowered you are, the stronger the foundation you put in every day to your life is what are your habits and your routines. When you wake up, do you dive into grabbing hold of your phone and looking at social media? Or that first half an hour, that first hour, I would say, is before you actually go into that, is what is the meditation you're doing? What is the self-talk? How do you retrain your mind? And we'll talk about all of this on the workshop. Retrain your mind so that you get into that place from the beginning. Most of our habits have been actually inherited, so we can change those, but it takes a bit of work. What exercise are we doing? Are we eating good nutrition? Once we have this strong foundation, we've got more resilience and power to start to have the conversations that matter, start to make the sort of changes, and to really show up in the world.
Awesome. So that wraps up our awesome conversation with Clare. Thank you so much. Huge thank you to you for this discussion that's very much needed, and also your masterclass, which will just help folks really flesh through this and start to work on this, because I find that more people will really step up into leadership and activism once they deal with their own stuff and get rid of this uncomfortability with having what they consider to be uncomfortable conversations around nutrition, with people who may not be privy yet to the information. So thank you again for this. And to everyone listening, I really hope this episode has provided you with practical tools to navigate the emotional landscape of clean eating, whether for yourself or others. We didn't really get to talk about how to make spaces more inclusive, because I do consider this lifestyle to be a DEI area of opportunity, right? Because DEI is basically diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a health equity issue at play here, which we are fully aware about, in America in particular, where health numbers of people of color are not good, right? And this way of eating is going to change the tide if we are not afraid to have these conversations. Plus the inclusivity of having these foods available at any event in any venue, right? So that more people can, have this be a little bit more accommodating to them. Instead of us bending over backwards because we're the clean eaters, there should be some accommodations for everyone to really be healthier. If we want a healthy community, right? If we are living within our values and actually matching what we say we want this world to look like. So if you found value in today's discussion, please don't forget to subscribe to the Raw Food Health Empowerment Podcast. You can also find more resources on the website over at rawfoodmealplanner.com. So check out the links in the description below. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. What resonated with you? What strategies do you plan to implement? I want to see your comments below the video. So please, thank you so much. Michael says, great chat, much blessings and much love from Ireland. Thank you, Michael, for watching. Appreciate you for joining us live. Until next time, this is Samantha Salmon and Clare Mann, and we're signing off, reminding you that every meal is an opportunity to nourish not just your body, but your mind and spirit too. So stay empowered, stay compassionate, and keep thriving on your high raw vegan journey. Take care.